Thanks very much, Steph. So firstly, just to add to that, I guess my passion for this kind of work at the time when I was involved in these kind of industries, there wasn't a lot of information around. And as we go through the slides, there's some things I'll talk about where we've actually seen for some of the people that I know through that work time where there's actually been different outcomes for them. So I would also firstly like to acknowledge the First Nations people, the Palawa people, the custodians of Lutruwita, and acknowledge elders past, present and emerging. Also like to thank Cancer Council WA, who contributed to some elements of this presentation and conducted a lot of the research for it. And also to thank WorkSafe Tas for holding these events throughout WorkSafe Month. They're a really key part of how we can help keep other Tasmanians safe. So, so thanks very much to WorkSafe Tas and for inviting me along. Today what I'm going to talk about, at Cancer Council Tasmania, we don't overly focus on the technical compliance elements. We have a strong focus on informing people about how certain risks occur, so they understand, I guess, the level of risk that could occur for them. We also look at how that then can affect our health, and we talk to people about making behavioural change. So for some of you here, you already have a really sound technical knowledge about some of these areas, and for other people, you may be looking at how you can work with your workforce to help them meet some of the standards. So if we have any, I guess, questions around technical compliance, we just refer them to WorkSafe Tas, because they're the experts in that area. So I'll get going with, this is also the slide that WorkSafe Tas has asked us to put up, which explains that we essentially, that they're not the creators of this content and they bear no liability in relation to advice taken from this content. So I'll also quickly just explain a little bit about the Cancer Council and who we are. So we have three main areas in our mission, and that represents support. So we support Tasmanians affected by cancer in a whole range of ways. This includes, we have support centres in all the regions in the state. We provide a whole lot of practical support, which can be anything from wigs to advice if someone's affected by cancer. Our transport to treatment team did enough kilometres to drive around the globe 6.5 times last year, taking people to appointments. So we do a lot of support work in the community. We also provide cancer prevention information sessions, and we contribute to research. So it's been about $7.5 million over the last 25 years that has gone into cancer research around the state through donations, and all our support has come from fundraising. So we get 90% of our income comes from other Tasmanians supporting our work. And sadly we know that 9 Tasmanians are diagnosed with a form of cancer each day. So it has a big impact on our community, and I'd also like to say that if anyone is affected by anything that we talk about, because we know that most people in the room will either have a personal experience or know someone affected, that it's fine to take some time out or chat to me after the session about our support services. So just to get started, we're obviously talking about silica dust and exposure in the workplace, and again, as stated earlier, this slide show a lot of the presentation information was developed by Cancer Council WA. So when we look at these activities here, what risks would people normally associate with these risks, with these activities? So if I was carrying a 20 kilo bag of cement, I'd be worried about my lower back. You know, if I was using the drill, I might be worried about, you know, like the drill spin around, or or cutting. I might be worried about cutting myself. And I'd use PPE, or I'd change my approach to the work. But all of those activities, they have one thing in common, which is exposure to silica dust. So exposure to silica dust increases your risk of developing cancer, and there's a few reasons for that. One is that our filtration system that we have when we breathe things in is from a time long before industrialisation. So we've evolved to basically be able to deal with the dust particles that occur naturally in the environment to some degree without the problems that we have when we start grinding and cutting different substrates. So if we wonder how big the problem is in Australia, 600,000 workers are exposed to silica dust through their occupation each year. So it's a fairly large proportion of the national workforce. Where is it found? So artificial or engineered stone bench tops. And that's a really big one. So a lot of bench tops that go into home installations or renovations now are made out of these, and they have a 95% crystalline silica component. So that's a very high amount, and so if you've got people who are cutting those, following the appropriate practices is critical. Natural stone, such as limestone, sandstone, ironstone, marble or granite. So again, for stonemasons, they have a risk just through the work that they do. Bricks, concrete and mortar. So again, often when you think about most construction sites, there's a lot of cutting or drilling into those substrates. Plastic composites like fillers or composite panels. Certain acrylics have high silica content, so it's important for people who are working with those particular products to be aware of that as well. Tiles and slates on our roofs, and it's found naturally in rocks, sand, gravel and clay. So there's a huge range of industries that work in those environments. So what we're really trying to get across to people is that people might be aware of certain elements where there's a level of exposure, but also not really understand some of the other activities that they do that might have an impact. So, and sand blasting abrasives, although there's a lot more legislation around that, but there's still people that use old stock or sandblasting materials that they've had for a long time, and they're highly problematic in relation to silica. So what causes it and what is it? It's created when silica is elements containing silica break down, and it's released into the air during any of the tasks that we discussed, such as cutting, drilling or grinding. There's also agricultural activities that can disturb soils and break down the silica content to a point where it can be inhaled and be problematic. Tiny silica dust particles float in the air. They're easily breathed in, and they're 100 times smaller than a grain of sand. So, and again, that goes back to I was talking about the filtration system that we have to stop things getting deep into our lungs. That just bypasses that. So that's why a small amount can be very problematic. So what makes it? Breaking, crushing, grinding, milling materials like concrete and aggregate. Drilling, cutting, sanding things like bricks and concrete. Dealing with cement. So that's a really interesting one. Like just even for people who are using bag cement on site, or people doing rendering, if they're using it before it's mixed, or if you're working in a cement plant, obviously you potentially have a higher exposure to the cement in that form. Laying or maintaining or replacing ballast, so in roadworks, so quarry material, can be problematic. Excavating, mining, quarrying or tunnelling. So again, if people in those activities, quarrying's a really interesting one. So I think that's probably emerging where more and more people are understanding the risk while they're disturbing the soil, because it's in so many soil types and so many rock types. So if you're digging through, digging up and you're crushing and you're bringing dust into the air, then you're increasing the risk. And abrasive blasting, as we talked about before. Dry sweeping after a task where silica has been created, silica dust has been created. So often, I just think back to when I used to work and we'd cut out a big slab doing a shutdown somewhere, and we'd cut out something to pour, and then we'd just sweep the stuff up or use one of those leaf blowers. And, you know, it's just, the level of understanding now is very different. So it's not something, that, so wet sweeping is what's recommended. So I've got a few questions, and these have come out of things that we've actually asked people who work in those industries, and these are some of the things that we've had back. So you won't get lung damage after you blow your nose through breathing dust. So what do people think? I think probably fairly obvious. So it's not correct, a little cross has moved. But and I'm okay if I'm working outside, so that being in an outdoor area, it means that you don't need to take any other protective measures, which is also wrong. And the work I'm doing only takes a short time, so if it's a short exposure, it should be fine. So that's another common one. And the dust will clear quickly, and that one's wrong as well. And the reason why that one is wrong is because it's so fine, it hangs in the air longer. So it can be breathed in a lot easier, and just because it's the idea that it'll clear quickly is not always correct, and it depends on the working environment that you're in. How can silica dust harm our health? So some of the diseases that we get are lung cancer, silicosis, and we're seeing now an emerging trend in younger apprentices who have been working with engineered stone. So younger age groups are now presenting with silicosis. Chronic obstructive pulmonary disease. So basically they can be really similar to some of the diseases that people have when they smoke cigarettes. And asthma. So people can have a reactive asthma to long-term exposure from things that they inhale during the workplace. Workplace exposure standards. The maximum so this refers to the maximum allowable concentration in workplace air. In Australia, the standard was 0.1 of a milligram per cubic metre in an 8-hour day. And it's currently under review. I think nearly all states have now gone to 0.05 of a milligram, and that's been adopted nationally. And breathing in more than the workplace exposure standard over an 8-hour day can increase your risk of lung cancer and other diseases. So I just want to do a quick exercise. So 0.05 of a milligram, if you imagine like one of those water IBC cubes, so that's basically that much. It's like a 40,000th of a teaspoon is the amount that's acceptable over an 8-hour day to breathe in. So that's why the regulations and controls are so important, because the exposure standard shows what people can actually tolerate safely, and it's really quite low when you consider that in the volume of air that's acceptable over an 8-hour day. So what can we do to control exposure? and eliminate the use of high silica content materials. So obviously any form of substitution, it's the normal hierarchy of risk management. So elimination where feasible is obviously the preferred risk management strategy. Use local approved exhaust ventilation to remove dust at the point it is produced. And again, we don't provide expert advice on which particular devices to use in which situations, because workplace scenarios are so complex and varied. We would recommend that people actually talk to the team at WorkSafe Tas to get the correct advice on what is the appropriate protective equipment or tool for the task. Ensure tools have approved for task on-tool extraction. So again, making sure that if you're using a tool that's taking away, like I've had people talk about, they've bought basically, like a sanding device that has one of those little things popped on the back, and it's just not suitable. And we talk to them about actually getting the right advice. And wet down the work to keep the dust levels lower. So wet area working is really critical when there's dust. And then wear suitable respiratory protective equipment that fits properly. So fit testing is something that's quite often overlooked. And the other thing that we should have up there too is actually talking to WorkSafe Tas about how to go about correct air quality monitoring. So, and then clean up correctly, no dry sweeping of silica containing materials. So why is protecting your lung health important? So this is Dennis, who has come to the Cancer Council to share his story. So Dennis has a form of lung cancer from his work in his early years. So Dennis used to work in metal fabrication, where they used a lot of asbestos and a whole lot of other products. And apart from breathing in the metal fumes, he also breathed in asbestos. And Dennis is, now he's retired. He's talked to us about a whole lot of things that have changed his life, and that this happened for him when he was at a very young age. So when we hear about young apprentices getting silicosis or developing lung cancer from the inflammation caused by silicosis, these are the kind of things that we want to see change for people. Richard, who's a stonemason, he's been diagnosed with sarcoidosis, which causes inflammation, increases his risk of developing lung cancer. He watched his father pass away from exposure from workplace carcinogens. So when we talk to people about this stuff, this is the message that we really want people to understand, is that the impacts that are real. And the other thing is Dennis is at a retirement age, but we're also seeing people throughout every stage of life, have a diagnosis, and that can range from lung cancer, silicosis, mesothelioma, and there's a whole range of other, as we discussed, implications for our lungs that can affect the way we live, and they can also, they can often be fatal. So why do people not use the right protective strategies and equipment? And so when we've talked to people, the answers that we've had, so time pressure often sits with people doing a job, and cost is something for people that are trying to manage the job. And what we talk to people about time pressure is we ask workers, like, can you, talking to your safety manager or your manager about what you can change, because that time pressure argument doesn't stand up to a coroner or a compensation claim, and neither does the cost of the job to the employer. So, incorrect beliefs about risk. So a lot of people have, so when I used to do welding, all the old boys used to tell me stuff about if you drink milk you'll be fine. When you're welding zinc and doing that stuff, well, it might chelate the zinc a bit and you don't get as much metal fever, but do you reckon breathing in hot metal is good for your lungs and flux? Not really. I have a theory now, if it's not oxygen, I don't want it in there. Anything else, because people debate around different substrates being less harmful than the other, I just go, is it oxygen? I reckon that's probably a good benchmark. So workplace culture is another one. Again, I grew up in an era where you're almost seen as soft if you, if you applied safety standards, which I found, when you think about it now, if you're trying to do a job, you get the right tool for the job. And an appropriate protection is just the right tool for the job. The idea that it's a sign of weakness is changing, and so it should be. Habit. So this is a really big one. So I'm going to do an exercise. I'm going to ask everyone, if tonight when you go home, if you can unlearn how to drive for me. So if you can unlearn how to drive by the end of the day, we'll see how you go. Because how did you learn how to drive?
What you got shown.
What's that?
What you got shown.
Yeah, so that's really key. And there's another one, really simple one. How'd you learn how to read? Yeah, repetition. So people will do, I've learned all this stuff, and I'll go to weld something, and in part of my head will go, some of those thoughts, it's a short task or whatever. So habit is really important. So if you're working with your teams around changing things, understanding that some of their behaviour is habit-based is really important. Inaccurate knowledge around best practice procedures and regulations. So we really like people to touch base with WorkSafe TAS to find out the right information. And again, if you have a workforce that's exposed to workplace carcinogens, it's your obligation to make sure that information is correct. So this is something that we take through when we work with people. So if people want to use this as a bit of an idea for working through some of these, I guess, like changing habits in a workplace, actually sitting down with your team and just getting them to nut out some ideas around how you can do things differently or how you can change some of the habits is really critical. So we do this with pretty much all of our cancer prevention messaging. And what it does is it recognises that actually making changes can sometimes be difficult. If we all just did everything right based on the knowledge that we had, like no one would even need to be here, because most people know that there's risks with not following appropriate protective behaviours. So what we do is we go through, you just clearly identify the goal, and it might be as simple as not getting sick from workplace exposure. If you're a manager, it might be not wanting my workers to get sick from workplace exposure, not wanting litigation. And then why is this change important to me? So you try and reinforce some motivation. So again, for a worker, protecting my lung health, living healthier, not being sick when I go to retire and enjoy my life, being able to enjoy things on the weekend, reinforce those motivation. And then barriers. So why isn't it happening? Let people honestly name up those things so you can actually work through them in a really healthy and positive way and make some changes. So if someone's feeling that there's too much time pressure to do things properly, you either need to look at their workplace practice or the expectations of the workplace. And what can I do? Remembering PPE, talking to workmates. I still do some outdoor work, and I use a big industrial blower, and I've written on the thing, mask, just so I remember. It's a really simple thing, but so you just work out with your team what things are going to help them do it and check in with them. Again, it's about repetition. So if you kind of have a chat with your team about what they need to do and you don't go over this stuff from time to time, it'll drift off into the distance. There's a reason why marketing companies, continue to advertise. Everyone's heard of Coke, and they still put it out there because it's through reinforcement of message that we learn and we do things differently. And then remembering to talk to your supervisor about time constraints, look at some of the operational things that might actually be contributing to the problem. And who can I ask for help? start with your site safety manager is what we tell a lot of people. If you feel like you're getting stuck and they're not listening and they're still putting you at risk, we encourage people to actually go to WorkSafe Tas and to talk to them about, about why they're not feeling safe at work, because everyone has that right. So I guess that's a really critical one, is sometimes people feel really afraid in the workplace, but what we try and do is help them understand the consequences of not speaking up, and also helping them understand that they're protected by law by speaking up. And ultimately, we also work with managers to help them understand that if they've got a workplace that is communicating problems, they're actually at a lower risk of litigation because they're aware of problems before they get more serious. So I guess I just wanted to say thanks for listening and having me here. And just to summarise a bit, our biggest point here is that injury from silica dust is preventable, and most workplace cancers are preventable, and that responsibility is shared between workers and management. And if you're unsure, ask for guidance and speak up if you need to is a really key message. And we're also happy, Cancer Council are happy to come out and talk to workers about occupational risk. And we can also send out through Steph and the team, we can send out some more information on links about where to get more information around risk, and also to touch base with WorkSafe Tas if you need information about regulation and compliance. But also, I think if you're working in environments where you're exposed to silica dust, is actually, again, talking to the WorkSafe team about how you go about air quality monitoring is really key. Yeah. So, and then, does anyone have any questions? Yeah.
So there's similarities between asbestos and silica?
They're both small fibres that lodge in the lungs and they cause inflammation, but they're different products. Yeah. So yeah.
And the PPE and the controls you use for silica would be similar?
Similar but different. I think there'd be some differences with asbestos. Yeah, so I don't know. Maybe is anyone here from the WorkSafe Tas team that could answer that?
It would be similar
Because because at the moment you currently need a licensed professional to manage asbestos, but it's different in relation to silica. So I'm not sure whether there's anything other than that. But yeah, the PPE components be similar. Yeah. But if you want, I can find out more. Have a chat with the guys. Yep. Cool. Any other questions?
Is silica dust a chemical reaction in your lung, or is it just an obstruction in the lung?
So it's more of an obstruction. So it's problematic because it causes inflammation. Yeah. 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 So anything that causes inflammation in our organs increases our disease risk. Yeah.
When you're talking about younger people becoming ill from it, what sort of age range do you heard about?
So through the National Committee, it's talking about guys in their late 20s and early 30s. So when you look at, say, something like mesothelioma from asbestos, is that usually has a much longer onset. So a lot of the people, as a lot of your team would know, they present at a much older age. But what they're starting to see now is the emergence of younger people, because it's such a high silica content, particularly in the stone benchtop work. So one of the things Cancer Council is advocating for nationally is for full substitution of that product. So we personally, you know, our position on that nationally is that that it's too problematic to use. So, yeah. Yep.
When you go out to workplaces, is that like a community visit, as in free, or do they pay for it?
So all of Cancer Council services are free. Yeah, so we go out and and we talk to a really broad range of workplaces around a broad range of subjects. So, yeah. Anything else?
If I went into Bunnings,
Yes.
you already know what the question is.
I've got a story there, but anyway, yeah.
But if you went into to Bunnings and you're uneducated and you wanted to see what sort of mask do you use, is it labelled? Is it protected?
So one of the things I've forwarded through to the occupational cancer community is that we improve a whole lot of point of sale stuff for consumers, because the other thing is a lot of tradespeople who, it may not be their specialty occupation, but they still do some of that work, and where do they go to get their equipment? And look, I'm going to fess up. About 18 months ago, I was doing some welding and I bought a mask that didn't quite fit under my welding hood, and so I didn't have a proper fit test. So the welding off to zinc, I ended up with in and out of the respiratory clinic and on a steroid inhaler for 6 months. So, and that was using what was advised for me at the point of sale, and I should probably known better, but what you actually talk about is very, and it's very easy for people to do. So, and again, when you look at a lot of welding products, there's not a lot of good product information there in relation to, you know, the level of risk. And same with grinding, like when you buy a grinder and a set, it doesn't say that you're at risk if you're cutting these particular substrates. So we'd love to see better point of sale. So that's actually a personal passion of mine. It was before I didn't have the right mask. So I had technically the right mask, but because it didn't fit under the hood, it moved it away, so it breached a fit test. And when you're welding really heavy gauge zinc and base metal, that's what happens. So yeah, probably not the best way to do a field test, but anyway. Yeah. Yep.
Kind of down similar lines, but I was wondering about how you recognise the fabricated plastic products that you were talking about.
Yeah, look, again, with such a high variation in import sources, I actually wouldn't know the answer to that. And again, it's probably something we could probably talk to Safe Taz about, maybe lobbying for better product information. Because, I've got a friend who's a Skylight manufacturer, and they use a whole range of products, and they come from all over the globe, and they're all made in different ways, and they're imported into the country through the supplier. So, I just don't know how you monitor that, but it's certainly not product more than
In a lot of those sheet products, there's safety information. So certainly, like with kitchen mention, obviously it's done pretty neat where everyone's labelled and it tells you what you need to do. So it's just a matter of reading it.
Yeah.
That's assuming that you've purchased it new and got it out of its packet, but yeah.
Yeah, a bit of good stuff. Yeah, obviously if you're dealing with something that's there, we have to do a higher order control and assume the worst case. Just assume that it's in there.
I think that's the thing. It goes back to that thing. If it's not oxygen, I don't want to breathe it in there, because some acrylic products that, I've seen haven't come with any safety data sheet or information. And I think, just assume it's a problem and you eliminate the risk.
Can I ask a question?
Yeah.
Maybe it's not applicable to just Cancer Council Tasmania, but do you guys have any influence over what's broadcast on TV, like with the DIY shows? Portraying it's okay not to wear PPE in a lot of situations, potentially working with silica, asbestos, all sorts of carcinogenics. Do you guys see an area where, or an opportunity where you can influence what's broadcast to people?
What I actually think is I think that there could be better collaboration, probably with WorkSafe TAS and Cancer Council Australia and the Lung Association of Australia, where with joint advocacy, because we advocate sometimes where we have the resources, but we're a small voice in amongst the sea of, we're often, whenever we advocate on a health-based perspective, we're always competing against industry. So, but I do know that we've say for example in the SunSmart space, we've advocated for changes around, the way certain marketing is conducted so that there's better modelling and so on, and we do that within our own organisation, but it's actually really hard for us to change, bring in, I guess, national standards individually, and we do that work across all of our messaging. We do that with alcohol advertising, we do it with the National Obesity Strategy as well, but I think the more we have a united voice with more organisations, the more likely we are to be heard. But, yeah. So the answer is yes, but not always successfully.
Just for information, I think WorkSafe Queensland had quite good information on silica. So that's probably what used to be the best on the book for a while, but a year or so, but been quite good about, say, different way you're cutting something, what kind of exposure you can have out of that, how much exposure you get out of sweeping up dust and things like that. So if you're looking for something, we're a small state, so we don't use a lot of stuff, but go to WorkSafe Queensland, look for silica guidance or something, search for that.
Yeah, and on top of that, Cancer Council WA also have, and if you go to the Cancer Council Australia page, they link through to their page, so they've done a lot of work, and they've done a lot of work with in the UK there's a Know Your Cancer Risk, which is occupational cancers, and they've done a fair bit of work there, and they're probably the lead state as far as this space in Cancer Council Australia. So, Any other questions? One thing I'd also like to say is if people, so one of the things that we talk to people who have been exposed to silica or other workplace carcinogens, they get quite concerned around, what might be going on for them, and we encourage people, if you have those concerns, just start off with your doctor. They'll go through whether you need to do any further testing. Most of the time, testing comes back with generally peace of mind, which is a good outcome, and if there is a problem and you find it early, you're in much better shape too. So that was the other thing I just wanted to add, and to say thank you very much for your time, and thanks for having me.